Hi, I'm Mike, owner of the In-Groove in Phoenix, Arizona. Very frequently, I actually get asked, how did you start the In-Groove? And it's a question I've answered a lot of times in the live streams that I used to do, but those live streams would last 2-3 hours, and it might be a 2-minute little answer inside of that live stream. So finding it, I myself would have a difficult time doing it. But I figured I would actually answer that specific question as a standalone video. And I could provide a little more context, photographs, and a little bit more detail than I even did in the live stream. So I actually have been collecting records since I was a kid in the 90s. I collected records because CDs were very expensive. I grew up in a very poor family in a very poor city in Florida, like north of Tampa, Pasco County area. So records was more of a necessity than a desire at that point in time, because you can get records for 10, 20, 30 cents, 50 cents a piece at garage sales, yard sales, flea markets, where a new CD was like $19, and $19 was not even coming close to happening. It just wasn't an option. So that's kind of how I got started collecting records. And even when MP3s came along and you could download infinite amounts of music on Napster and those types of places, I myself still gravitated towards records, because at that point I had a collection that was, in my eyes, pretty fantastic. Now, looking back, I bought all the wrong stuff at the wrong time, because back in the 90s and in the early 2000s, the stuff that everybody wanted was your Beatles, Elvis, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens. Those were like the creme de la creme records. Old Blue Note Jazz records, Psych records, Northern Soul records. Nobody cared about those. It wasn't even remotely on anybody's mind. Those were bargain bin records for the most part. So that was the stuff that I had collected. I moved to Arizona from Florida, and I started a career, started a family, and collecting kind of took a backseat for a few years in the early 2000s. I remember going into a record store here in town and seeing a original first press UK numbered Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness on the wall for like $20. And I thought to myself, and this was a store that specialized in selling records for $2.99. Pretty much everything was $2.99. Every now and then they would have a record that cost more. But I remember thinking to myself, I'm not paying $20 for that record. $20 is ridiculous. I'll wait until that record's like $3-4. But that was kind of the mentality in the early 2000s. Started my career up. I got a little bit more spare time, but also a lot more disposable income. Now, I had at the time in the late 90s a Marantz receiver that I inherited from my grandmother. I had what I deemed a high-end system. And that kind of, I look back today and it's kind of what I had and the speakers I had. It was kind of somewhat laughable. But I started getting some more disposable income in the early 2000s. And I started buying higher-end gear, shifted more of a focus to audiophile records. So the days of collecting Beatles picture sleeves, Doors picture sleeves, Doors 45s, Elvis picture sleeves. Like, that was my focus as a kid, what I was collecting. That kind of went away, and I started shifting more towards sound quality. But at the time, audiophile records were few and far between. You had the remnants of DCC, Classic Records was making stuff, Analog Productions was making stuff. Mobile Fidelity kind of was out of the business at that point in time. That early 2000s, they weren't really doing anything. And there was some sporadic labels here and there. But for the most part, audiophile records were few and far between. And to get an audiophile all-analog record, you would wait a month or two. And no matter what it was, you pretty much bought it, because if you wanted a new audiophile record to listen to, you would buy it. And most of the records that were being made mainstream-wise back then were pretty mediocre. They were more novelty-ish in the early 2000s than anything. There wasn't a lot of stuff outside of the audiophile labels making good records. Now, at that point in time, I had upgraded my system. I had a Macintosh 2300 preamp, some monoblock amps. I had a beautiful pair of XRT 24 speakers that I liked, some line array speakers. And that was my very first high-end system. I had those speakers for 20-something years before I finally sold them recently. They had powered the original In-Groove store for a lot of years. Drove out to California and got them. Got a pair of 901s hanging up in the corner that he was replacing them with. but they were great speakers. Had a pair of, I think I eventually got a pair of 601 monoblock amps when they first came out. And it was a great little system before things, got progressively out of control. But I had been accumulating records, audiophile records, and then, right around the late 2000s, record collecting had kind of picked up. More options were available. Mobile fidelity had came back. Audiophile labels were making more stuff. More things in vinyl were generally, from the early 2000s, they were kind of picking up. And around 2009, 8, 9, 10, 11, I was really starting to get into the quality differences between records. And I had started accumulating a lot of records. God, that was a long time ago. That's 20 years ago, practically, at this point. But I had started accumulating various pressings, and it interested me quite a lot. And I would keep little detailed notes on my records of what it was, what the matrix was, who was the mastering engineer, kind of where did I prefer this? Did I prefer it in stereo and mono? So that was something that I kind of had referenced in my collection. I'll tell you this because it partakes to the store later. But anyways, I had been collecting, and the collection expanded. I was doing record shows at that point in time. I was doing local record shows, setting up as a dealer, because what happened was I was buying collections. I would go on Craigslist, which was kind of relatively new. I was buying collections that way. I was going in. Sometimes I'd go into a record store. They would get a new collection. I'd be like, hey, you want it? And I would see them buy. Maybe they would give $1,000 for it. Be like, hey, I'll take the whole collection now for $2,000. And then I would buy the whole collection. So I had been accumulating a lot of records, and I got to the point where I had needed to start moving stuff. Now, at this point in time, I had a chain of mattress stores, sleep shops is the technical name for them. But I had 5 sleep shops, and that was kind of my business. But records and hi-fi was my hobby. I really didn't care about mattresses. That was something to make money. I was good at it. I did it successfully, and it funded my addiction, which was buying slabs of vinyl records, petroleum vinyl records with cardboard covers. But I had gotten to the point where I had just been accumulating more than I could actually sell at record shows. But it got to the point too where right around 2013, 14, in the beginning of 2015, records were really starting to pick up steam. And it got to the point where it got difficult getting good records because there was a lot more competition. There was more competition online. I would go into a record store, and then the record store owners were like, oh, you can't buy, collections, you can't buy that. I'm keeping that for myself. You can't. And I thought to myself, man, I need a record store myself so I can start keeping more good stuff. So Super Bowl 2015, I was throwing a Super Bowl party in my house, and I had saw on Craigslist an advertisement for 410 mobile fidelity sealed records. I'll put some images up from here on out kind of throughout the video of 410 mobile fidelity sealed records. There was 100 UHQRs in it. There was like 4 Beatles box sets, a Sinatra box, 3 or 4 Rolling Stones boxes. There was like 30 in the Court of the Crimson King records. And I had called the guy up on the Super Bowl and said to him, I'm like, there's no way this guy still has these records. It was kind of like a make offer type of thing. He's like, yeah, I'm not this was halftime. I called the guy and I made plans. I'm like, can I come over? He's like, oh yeah, I don't watch the Super Bowl. I just got off the golf course. Come on over. So I left my Super Bowl party after the halftime show, and I drove out to this guy's house, and he inherited them from a family member who was mentally disabled, who worked at a record store but got paid in mobile fidelity records. He would take one record, open it up, record it to tape, and that's what he would listen to. But he had just been accumulating a massive quantity of records, and this guy had plenty of money. It was a really wealthy house up north, but people were offering him like $1,000, $2,000. So, and he knew what they were worth. He wasn't trying to sell them for retail, but he just wasn't trying to be ripped off. So I made a deal with him on that because I just wanted one of each. I wanted to open a Dark Side of the Moon UHQR and a Sgt. Pepper UHQR and be the first person to ever play it. So I got a grip of sealed records that I was able to open and have for myself, just building out my own collection. Okay, got to the point at that point in time where I'm like, you know what? All things had kind of come together. That collection was just, I had boxes and boxes of stuff. I'm like, what am I going to do with this stuff? I had boxes from doing shows over the years, and I still had the furniture stores. And I thought to myself, you know what? There was a spot next to my furniture, one of my locations, my first location. I'm like, let me put a little record store in there. I've got a management, I've got people to run it. I'm like, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to operate this little record store there and see how that works out. So I opened it up with that collection, the stuff I had from the show, but very little. I had about 10 or 12 rows of records. I had built the bins and designed the bins, but I had about 10 or 12 rows of those records. The wall at the time was like 20 King Crimsons, 20 Dark Sides of the Moon. The whole wall was, and I remember Dark Side of the Moon, I think I had for $100. Never sold one. Sealed King Crimson I had for $250. I had sealed David Bowie for $1.25 at that time. Couldn't sell them. There was no market for audiophile records in Phoenix, Arizona. People that were buying that stuff if they were buying it online. There just was not a market for it. But I had wanted to open up a record store that I wanted to shop at. So I created a record store in Phoenix for a shop that I would like to shop at that didn't exist, but really there wasn't very many customers for. At that time, I would get all the audiophile records. And I remember at the time, Music Matters were $30 a piece, and people coming in and telling me, I'm not going to buy a Blue Train for $30 from Music Matters. I want to find an original. Hank Mobley Sextet, I'll find an original. It was so hard to sell that stuff. Mobile Fidelity stuff didn't sell, except for like Weezer Blue, because it was the imprint. It was targeted to a younger generation. But for the most part, audiophile records were a very tough sell. But I stocked them all because I wanted them for myself. And it was a thing for myself. But I was making a living selling essentially used records. And I would bring in more and more new records. And the store started off very small. It was a little tiny room, very few records. I had a purple couch in the middle I eventually put in there. But I remember my first day open, I think I made $45. Now keep in mind, I had a multi-million-dollar, did millions in revenue at the mattress store. And I would talk to my guys, like, check out the store's number, and maybe this store did $4,500 this day, $2,500 for the other store. Maybe another store did $6,000, and they would joke with me and say, "Hey, Mike, what'd you do today?" I'm like, "Well, I did $45," and I got ripped. It was made fun of. Mike's counting his dimes, and and I would go in checking on the other stores, and it was comical. Anyways. To sum that part of the story up, mattress business got very tough. The record business blew up. I closed one, opened the other. The record store is what I always wanted to do anyways. I remember when I was a little kid, I'd go in the flea market and there was a vendor there that sold records and CDs. And I remember thinking to myself, this has got to be the absolute most cool job in the entire world. Like, I thought about that. I would go in there, look at all the stuff that I could never afford. He had an old magazine, because at that time it was a paper magazine that you would order stuff from vendors, and he would look at that magazine and like you could order the Beatles and you could order colored Beatles records at the time. It was just so cool, and I remember thinking, this is the ultimate job. But it didn't seem like it was feasible to make money, so I opened the record store as a hobby. It just turned out to be something that I did and was successful doing it, but the store got bigger and bigger. I remember the very first record store day, Black Friday, I opened like a week before record store day, but I wasn't approved in 2015. But for Black Friday, I was, and I ordered a massive quantity of stuff, more than I think anybody at this time was ordering. It was bins and bins of stuff, 20 copies of Sharknado and 20 copies of this, and I just didn't know what I was doing, and I just got saddled with a lot of that stuff, well, for a decade. It was a huge learning curve, but doing record store day, I'll never forget, I had 22 live bands play the day of record store day, and we didn't have a stage, so I had a piece of old drywall that we threw in the back of the store, and these bands would perform on this drywall, and it was just, I was doing the sound, miking up instruments. It was a complete disaster. 20 bands. It was like a band. Every 20 minutes they would play. I'd have 10 minutes to set the next band up. And I remember it was like 10 o'clock at night. We still had 2 bands left to go, and I just was staying open to fit everybody who was billed to perform. And it was like 10 o'clock at night and like some 10-piece metal band was setting up. Thank God the cops came and shut us down because I was exhausted. I had wanted to go home. I had been working on this. It was just a disaster. Anyways, that particular original location expanded. I built out the unit next to me. We doubled in size. I started like hanging CDs from the rafters. It was double the size. The next record store day, the actual main record store day, not Black Friday, I had a nice tent. I had put it outside. It was covered. I had a stage built, like a wooden stage built. And we did it in front of the record store. But it was kind of funny because I'll never forget there was a guy, he was doing an act with like didgeridoos and bowls. And keep in mind, I'm on the second busiest street in all of Phoenix, Arizona. And he's trying to have me mic a didgeridoo and bowls. And he got so angry with me. I'm like, we're on the side of there's tens of thousands of cars that pass by here every day. I don't know how in the world you want me to mic a didgeridoo and a set of bowls. I did it. We played. It was a blast. The store was getting progressively busier and busier and busier. Finally, when I closed the mattress store down, I had that location next to the old store, original record store, and I had moved into that and I had doubled the size. And I remember thinking to myself when I moved into that, I don't know how in the world, this was around 2016, maybe 2016, end of 16, maybe 17. I thought to myself, I don't know how in the world I'm ever going to fill this. This store is humongous. I had tripled the size. And I didn't take a lot of early photos of that store because I didn't want to like embellish the fact that it was mostly a dance floor with some records off in the corner. But it didn't take long. We had constantly expanded the inventory. Now, I'll give you a little backstory too. The first maybe 6 years I was open 7 days a week, maybe 5 years. First 5 years I was open 7 days a week and I never took a day off. There was no vacations. There was no going anywhere. It was nonstop work. There became a point where I started taking Sundays off so I could go to football games. But there was no time taking off until I think around 2021. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So we moved into that new location around 2017. And the way I was able to expand so quick is I actually had previous income from another job. So I was able to literally just pour every nickel of money back into the store. I didn't need to live off of this money. So I couldn't have done it any other way. So I was able to pour money back into the store. So around 2017 came around, and I remember driving home from the theater, talking to my ex-wife at the time, and I'm like, you know what? The inventory was a nightmare at that time. We would sell a record, we'd write it down on a piece of paper. I'm like, we need to computerize this inventory. I cannot order anymore. It's just become unmanageable. Sometimes things don't get written down, and then people would go, hey, do you have Dark Side of the Moon? And I forgot to order it because it wasn't written down, and I wouldn't have Dark Side of the Moon. So then I'd have to remember, I gotta get Dark Side of the Moon. So it was just a disaster. So around 2017, I decided to put the website, computerize the store. But subsequently doing that, the software that I was using allowed me to create a website for free. But the website was a joke at that point in time. It was there, but I sold a couple of orders a week. Anyways, it took us 6 months straight, 2 people, me and my ex, she was working at the time, and we would just inventory. We were inputting all the new records in the system, building SKUs. That was an absolute nightmare. Thousands of items. Record store day never was quite the same. We ordered progressively more and more stuff, but I did one indoor live performance record store day, and it was so loud. I had everybody turned down to like below 1, and it was just blistering loud. People would walk up to the door during record store day and they'd walk away. So that was the end of live music for the In-Groove record store day events. But we got the system online and we just got busier and busier and busier. We were rocking by like 2018, 2019. I was buying big collections. We were rocking. And around 2017, I had started the YouTube channel. And that kind of came because I had bought so many records that around 2017, you would come into the In-Groove and I would have 50 copies of Sgt. Pepper. 10 different copies of, because it was in my nature, because I always had cared about different pressings and sound qualities. So I would just have those for the people that would care. And pretty much nobody would care because they would look at this and they go, why are these all different prices? And I would well, this is British pressing. It's more. This is an audio. You would get into that. And finally, I'm like, you know what? This was 2017. Before that, I had a YouTube channel, and I had some sports cars that I had done some burnouts on, and that's what was on the YouTube channel. But for the most part, I took those videos off, and I put a video of me talking about Sergeant Pepper. And that was the very first video that I did. And that was like 2017. I'm like, I'm just going to answer this question. And then somebody comes into the store and they say, hey, why do you have so many? I'm like, you know what? Go see this video. I talk about it. And it was successful. Nobody had been. Comparison videos were like not really a thing at that point in time. Then people would ask me like, well, what about this? So I did more and more of those. And then I started doing unboxing videos. But I had a small audience, maybe 4,000 people over that was built up from 2017 to like the end of 2019. I had a little tiny audience. But it progressively increased business. People would ask me questions. They would come in. Hey, I saw you on YouTube. Oh, you know about this? And then I would answer questions. 2020, COVID hits. And we get into, I remember the very leading up to COVID, they had talked like there's going to be a lockdown. The store got sparse. Very few people were coming in the store. I knew it was coming. I'm like, what in the world we're going to do? They go down in a lockdown. I'm a non-essential business. We're a lockdown. I had so much backstock of record collections and stuff to process that I had still gone into the store. Me and my ex, we would go into the store and we would just process records. The door's locked, the gate's locked. And it was like, we would go in there and, all right. So we did that for like 2 or 3 days. And I'm getting caught up on a lot of stuff. I bought a big audiophile collection that I have, thousands of different like MoFi DCC CDs. I remember getting all that stuff caught up. And I noticed the website had like 1 or 2 orders during like the first 3 or 4 days, where in the past we'd get an order a month. And people were like, hey, can I just pick it up? And they would say, oh, call me from the parking lot. And we would put it in front of the store. And then they would pick it up and drive away. It was a contactless pickup. And I said to my ex at the time, like, you know what? We're going to be homeless if we don't do something here. And I'm like, what about like, remember QVC? People used to shop from their house. I'm like, let's do some QVC type of videos. I'm going to show some records, and I'm going to tell people, hey, it's all online. You could buy it from the website. And maybe, my thinking was mostly locals. I'm like, but that'll work. Like, maybe that's something. Maybe we'll get a couple more orders after. And I remember doing that. And I'm like, and then I'll do a couple videos talking about some of my favorite audiophile records that I like the most, sound the best. And I did that. And I remember doing that was the beginning of the New Arrival video. And it just blew up like gangbusters. I remember like the very next day, we had like 20 orders. And like it was all me and Angel could do to pack up these orders because there was zero infrastructure for online in the store. I remember telling the first couple of customers, I'm like, hey, you mind waiting a little bit? I don't have anything to ship this. I had to order mailers. We didn't have anything to ship it in. We didn't have the supply. I knew nothing because we had been doing 1 or 2 orders a month. We had some stuff on Discogs, but I didn't want, I didn't have the ability to do it. So it blew up. And I remember in the earliest videos, we had sold like a huge quantity of like all of our audiophile stuff was gone. Tons of our inventory was gone. And then it got to the point where you couldn't get it anymore. So I remember doing videos talking about like, UPS, everything's delayed, because everybody was having employee shortages. What happened was everybody got stuck at home and got into the record hobby, or if they were already into the record hobby, all that disposable income was sucking all the inventory out of the market. There was no more inventory left at stores. Production had slowed down because they were going through their own lockdowns. And then there was this huge boom of customers and a huge lack of records. So that absolutely blew up to the point where I did not have the ability to ship from the location that I was at. I didn't have the infrastructure to receive pallet after pallet after pallet of records. We were rolling pallets up to the front door. We had no way. We had a little tiny door in the back. We had a little kitchen in the back that I had packing tables in front of, and we were packing records in front of that and the packing table, which was in front of like a stove and a refrigerator. It was comical. So this happened all through 2020 and then through 2021. Through the middle of 2021, it's like, okay, once again, we've done really well. We've made a lot of money and COVID. It was huge for us. It blew up. We became a full-blown on internet business. We were moving pallets of stuff. If I could get 100, 2, 3, 4, 500 of a record, because at the point, it wasn't a matter of could you sell it, it was a matter of could you get it? Because if you got the merchandise, you sold it immediately. So I had took that money and I had poured it into a dedicated location. I knew to myself, I'm like, I'm tired of moving this record store. If I do it again, it's going to be the last time. So saved every nickel I had. We're going to buy a dedicated building. The building that I bought had been a building that I had known about for years because I had bought all of my dollies at this building. There was like a dolly and caster store. And a buddy of mine's like, hey, that building's going to go for sale. I'm like, oh, I want that building. Like, I didn't even have to look at it. They're like, it's going to be X amount. I'm like, I'm buying that. So I called, I made an offer. It was perfect because it was a little retail up front. It was a warehouse in the back. Like, that is perfect. I had almost nothing that needed to be done for it. But I'll throw some pictures up. I remember we were so packed at the other store. We were putting records in the aisles. I had bins of records on the floor, like in mailing, like RTI boxes, just lined up because that was our inventory. We had them in the aisles. Couldn't put anything. And I remember moving into that location and the warehouse was empty. The front we filled up nicely, but the warehouse had nothing in it. I remember thinking to myself, I am never going to fill this up. This would be so ridiculous to be able to fill this up. And it was just, I could have stored 10 cars in there. It was like an indoor parking lot. But we, progressively to this day, put more and more money into the store. You know, if you watch our latest video on a tour, which is still about 1.5 years old, we've got significantly more records than even that, but we filled it up. We got 14-foot ceilings and we've got records to the rafters. I've got thousands of square feet of record space in the warehouse. If you haven't seen that video of the tour I did of the store, check it out. I'll put a link below, In-Groove Record Store Tour. And that's more or less currently what the store is. But when I was able to move, I was able to do the store that I had originally wanted. I always wanted to do hi-fi. And I actually opened the store up with the intention of doing hi-fi, but it was very difficult to get manufacturers on board. Everybody at the time was like, if this brand was affiliated with this company, they weren't going to sell you. So there was virtually nothing to get. I never put together that. Because of that, I just never built the effort and the time for putting in sound rooms and that kind of thing. But when I got this store, I'm like, I'm going to be able to do exactly what I want. I was able to put a sound room in. I was able to go a lot deeper into hi-fi, which was something I wanted to do from the very beginning. So I went much deeper into hi-fi, much deeper into records, much bigger online. We wildly increased the size of our shipping department. Record store days now are absolutely monstrous. I remember at the time where I would get $10,000 worth of record store day items. Now we're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of record store day items. At the time I'd get 5 of this record, 10 of this record, and I think to myself, this isn't a ridiculous amount but now I'll get 2, 3, 400 of records sometimes. So everything has gotten so exponentially bigger. And it's really thanks to the guys who are watching this video now, more than likely, because those are the ones that have been, helping us to progress. And I really do thank all of you guys for that. But that is kind of the story of the In-Groove and kind of where we gotten today. It essentially was a lot of no days off, no money, and constantly reinvesting. But now I'm to the point where I'm getting some time off. And, I'm getting some money out of it now. So it's been great. And I never thought all those years ago as a kid going to that record store thinking to myself, I want to do this. This is my dream job. I want to do this. And the reason I was able to work 7 days a week for 6 years straight is because it wasn't work. I went to work every day, but I listened to records and I did comparisons at the store. And I had I brought my old original Macintosh system into the store. So I had a beautiful pair of line arrays and, beautiful turntables, stuff that I was selling. And I just listened to tunes and priced records and bought records and processed records. So it wasn't work. It was paradise. It was something that I had wanted to do my whole life. All the jobs I had before that were work, but this wasn't work. So I was able to do it nonstop for years. And like I said, I was lucky. But all the little things I did, I remember in the original store, I put together a record show. You know, we did a record show in tents out front. I tried all kinds of things, found what I like to do, and I've got it dialed in now to where it's kind of perfect. This is what I like to do. I've got it the store that I want, the hi-fi gear, the mail order, the locals. Could I close the business down, expand the warehouse, and make a lot more money? Yeah, probably. Excuse me. I could. The money is online, but I love having a record store. I love having a hi-fi store. So from a business perspective, is there better ways to do it? Yeah, but this is exactly what I want. I'm happy with it. I love the interaction. I like employees. I like having a place to go to that I'm required to go to at a specific time. It's paradise. But yeah, check out the video. Again, if you haven't bought from us, I don't know why you're watching this video, because you're like, why would you care about this random store you've never heard of? But we're at theingroove.com. We specialize in audiophile records, but we have everything. Hi-fi gear, audiophile records. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of work, but it's been a lot of fun. But my journey in records. But, there's some stuff that's happened in between there. Stuff with mobile fidelity. I mean, you go back and watch the channel, some of the more popular videos. There's been a lot of drama and things that have gone up. But I kind of wanted to tell you guys the stuff that you might not have known, even if you have watched the YouTube channel. That's kind of my goal in this video, giving you guys the background information on the stuff you might not have known if you're not local to Arizona. If you're local, you've seen this. I have a customer that comes in to this day who put on our Facebook page before we opened, hey, I'm really looking forward to coming in this store. One of the first, guys I remember from my very first week still coming in. They've seen the transitions, but if you're not local, you haven't. So throw some photos up, tell you guys about it, and hopefully you, if you have any comments, leave them below. I'll be curious what you guys think. This is a weird video for me to do, but I thought it'd be fun to do it, kind of just for me to jog my memory and think back on these times. All right, guys, until next time.